Hey, and welcome to part 2 of my 3-part series where we'll be painting a lion, a giraffe and a zebra using the same 6 colours in our palette. In this tutorial we'll be painting the lion. If you need some help with how to start, head over to my Watercolour for Beginners tutorials and go from there. Here's what you'll need to set up, and once you've got your reference photo printed, we're ready to start. I'm going to take you through the image transfer technique that we used in the last video. So firstly, print out your image onto normal printer paper. Then flip it over and cover the back of the image in graphite. The graphite stick works best as you can quickly cover a large area, but you can also use a pencil. Flip it back over and position it onto your page where you want the painting to be. Secure it lightly with some masking tape and then take a pen and draw around the lion. Make sure you don't press too hard, and you can check that the image is transferring by lifting parts of the paper. Remember to keep it in place until you've finished your drawing. So remove the paper once you've done, and you've got your line drawing ready to go. We're going to apply some masking fluid because this helps with the texture in the lion's fur and also helps to keep things like whiskers and highlights in the eye nice and clear. You don't have to use masking fluid, so just be mindful of your highlights as you're painting if you don't use it. I've poured a little bit into the palette and I'm using a silicone tool to apply it to the paper. If you use a brush, the masking fluid will dry in the bristles and ruin it. So the silicone tool is good because it just peels off. Make sure your masking fluid is completely dry before you start painting. You can see I'm helping it along here with the hairdryer. So we're going to use the same 6 colours that I used in the previous video for the zebra. They're from my Winsor & Newton palette, and they are Gamboge Hue, Yellow Ochre, Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber, Purple Lake and Payne's Grey. If you haven't got those exact colours, don't worry, just find something similar from your own palette. I've mixed a well of each of those colours before I start, and also painted a swatch of each of them onto the page for reference. Starting with the lightest colour first, which is the Gamboge Hue, we're going to do wet in wet technique. So I've painted a wash of fresh water over the whole of the mane, and I'm going to start by loosely putting some broad brush strokes of the Gamboge Hue on the mane, just start building that texture. Now, while the paint is still wet, we're going to add some other colours in. So we're going to start building the texture and the shadows. So here I'm adding the yellow ochre into the shaded areas of the mane. So make sure you keep looking back at your reference photo for where that is. So here, adding the burnt sienna. I'm adding less and less as I go forward because I don't want to completely cover up the two colours I've put on previously. Now I'm adding in some burnt umber to the really dark areas. We're just building up the shadows and the colours and the texture in the mane. And I'm working quite quickly because I want to do this while the main wash is still wet. So as we did with the zebra, we're going to go bold with that colour, and I'm now going to add some of the purple lake into the shadowed areas. It's going to create a nice warm tone, but also give it a nice contrasting colour to that yellow. Okay, I think that's all we can do on the mane for now, so we need to let that dry completely. So we'll move on to another section and start on the face. I'm just going to put a wash down as we did before, because we're going to use the wet in wet technique to create the shadows much in the same way as what we've just done with the mane. So just a wash of fresh water first, and then we'll start to apply our wet paint. So following the same stages as we did for the mane, we're going to start with the lightest colour first, which is the Gamboge hue. So after the first wash of Gamboge hue, we're going to use the darker colours to start building up the shadows. So I've gone in with yellow ochre and then the burnt sienna, and just repeat that process until we've got the shadows on the face. Again, we'll get some nice soft blending colours because we're using the wet in wet technique. Don't forget to add the purple lake into the really darkest areas to give it that nice pop of colour. Okay, so this is a good time for a break because we need to let that dry completely. So either let it dry naturally, go and put the kettle on, or you can use a hairdryer to help it along if you're a bit more impatient like I am. So we need to define the edges of the chin against the white paper. In the picture it's all quite white, but we need to obviously make the painting look right, so I've just used a little bit of yellow ochre to put in a few of those wispy hairs or whiskers on the chin. That's just going to help define it against the white of the page. So now I'm going to use a smaller brush and I'm going to put a little bit more detail in around the mouth. We need some more shadow in there, and if I'm using my smaller brush with wet paint on dry paper, I've got a lot more control over where that paint goes. So I'm also using the smaller brush with wet paint on dry paper to define the brow and the edge of the nose. These are things that sometimes when you use just wet in wet you don't always get exact edges, so it's good just to tidy them up as you go along. So we're going to focus on putting in some of the more detailed shadow on the face. So I've started with where the face and the mane meet. It's quite dark in that area. Just remember to keep looking back at your reference photo. I'm using the burnt umber to do this. And I've also used it just to define the eye. Just added some purple lake to underneath his chin to enhance those shadows. And then I'm going to use some burnt sienna just to put a bit more shadow in on the forehead. I'm using Payne's Grey to define the nose. You don't have to be too detailed with this, but I've used it on the nose and to put some extra shadow in on the mouth. and also to darken the eye. I'm putting in some extra details on the mouth, so there's the darker parts where the whiskers are in the cheek, and a little bit more definition underneath the eye as well. So I'm happy with the way the face looks now. I think we've done enough shadows and we've put enough detail in. It's not an extremely detailed picture, so I'm happy with it at this stage. I'm going to move on to the mane and just add a little bit more depth to the shadows. So using the wet on dry technique, so we've got wet paint onto dry paper, I've just used the burnt sienna to go over some of the shadows in the mane. It's going to add a bit more texture to all that lovely fur that he's got. So I've also mixed some burnt umber and some purple lake to make a warmer, darker brown, and added that into the shadows. And then I've also mixed purple lake and Payne's grey to make a cooler, darker colour. This is the same as what we did with the zebra, and I'm going to use that Payne's grey and purple lake mix to put in the really dark shadows on the underneath part of the mane. So once that's completely dried, again, it's time to take the masking fluid off. Now, you can take the masking fluid off and leave it as it is if you want, but I quite like to just tidy up some of the edges and some of the areas where I think there's probably been a bit too much masking fluid on. It's always better to put too much on. You can always correct it afterwards. If you don't put enough on in the first place, it's harder to make those corrections. So as long as the painting's completely dry, you just need to gently rub the masking fluid and it should just peel off. It's going to reveal some of those lovely highlights and the details in the whiskers. I do think some of these white areas need just a little wash. So I've lightly gone over with the gamboge hue and the purple lake on the mane. And then on the areas of the face where it's lightest, I'm just using the gamboge hue because that's our lightest paint colour, just to fill in some of those areas. So I've just tidied up around the eye area as well, and I've added in a few hairs above his eyebrows and on his cheeks. So I'm happy with the way we've used the colours. We've used a lot more of the yellow. So as you can see, we've focused on the warmer sort of yellow and burnt sienna tones in this one rather than the purples and greys in the zebra. But it just shows you how you can use the same palette and get a different effect by using different quantities of the different colours. So I really hope you enjoyed painting this one. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you in the next one where we're going to be painting a giraffe. Bye for now.